Hello and welcome to episode 3 of TE Present Teacher by Things Education, where we speak about cutting edge ideas in education in a way that is accessible by all and directly implementable in your classrooms. I am Aniruddh, your host today, and we will be talking with Ritu about what formative assessments are and how we sometimes have a misconception on what formative assessments are and how they are used in the classroom. So, hi Ritu.
Hi.
So, we have gathered again and we are going to be talking about a completely different thing. In the first episode, we spoke about importance of lesson plans. Then we spoke about what learning outcomes are, why they're important. And we're going to switch gears a little bit today and speak about formative assessments. Um, there is a need for formative assessments, and we kind of all have assumed that, if not knew that, for the longest time. But before we actually go into the need or what formative assessments, uh, how formative assessments need to be done, I think we should actually step back and talk a little bit about assessments themselves. Uh, so I'm just going to jump in and ask you my first question. Is that okay? True? Okay. So firstly, we know that assessments is something that we have to do. Students need to be assessed, evaluated for whatever different reasons. So can you just talk a little bit about what summative assessments are, what formative assessments are, and what is the purpose for both of these types of assessment?
Right. So, of course, all of us agree that assessments are really important. They form a very big part of our schooling, of our education. Um, and thanks to the NEP, now these terms, summative and formative, have become more commonplace, and we're thinking more about them. So let's start with summative assessment because I think we'll be talking about formative in a lot more detail. Let's start with what summative assessments are. Summative assessments are basically the kind of assessments that we have that we're used to in school. Our end of term exams, our final exams, those are what we call summative assessments because they are they give us an overall sense of uh, how much the students have achieved in that year and helps summative assessments help teachers and schools report to uh, parents, to school management as to what the results are of that year. So, in a broad sense, that is what summative assessments do. When we talk about formative assessments, on the other hand, formative assessments are more, if we have to define it very simply, formative assessments are more of feedback to the teacher about what students have learned and how teachers should then uh, customize their teaching or plan remediation or plan further lessons to make sure that any gaps left behind or any students that are struggling with concepts or topics can be helped and ensure that they're on track to meeting learning outcomes.
Right. So as I hear what you're saying, summative assessments are mainly a tool for reporting at the end of the year or the end of some amount of time, whereas formative assessments actually should be happening in a sense that it's giving feedback to the teachers and hopefully also the students, right? I mean that the students know what they, if this is my learning outcome or this is where I need to reach, this is how far I've gotten, and about 20% of my journey is still remaining. Um, so yeah, and so from what you're saying, I get a couple of things, and tell me if I'm right. A, the purpose of summative and formative assessments are different, which you just kind of articulated. And what was implied there is also the timing then of summative and formative assessments is different, in the sense that from what I inferred, and correct me if I'm wrong again, that summative assessments need to happen at the end of a period of time after the sort of learning has happened, and then there's no feedback or there's no recourse for the students or the teachers to go back depending on the results of the summative assessments. Whereas formative assessments, there's constant feedback and there's a loop kind of mechanism where I check whether students have understood, go back if the students have not, or move forward if the students have understood. So I think those are two things that I got. It kind of reminds me of an analogy that I used to use a lot about doing a play in high school or anywhere. Mm, Summative assessments sounds like the grand opening night of the play or whatever, the annual day of the when you are going to do the play. It's going to be a performance. Um, so it is going to be evaluated by parents and people from outside and some chief guest person and all of that. It is going to be evaluated, but after evaluation, I'm not going to get another chance to do it better if I'm one of the characters or actors in the play. Um, However, while we are practicing, uh, we can try out things in different ways. There is a director, or in this case, a teacher, who's telling you different, who's giving you different options as to how you can say a dialogue or stand in a different way or stand in a different place. So that I think that part would be formative, where you're doing the prep so that your end product is amazing for others to see outside of school. See, again, I don't even know if this analogy is going to be universally making sense, but it made sense to me, so I just brought it up. So fine. So we are saying that summative assessments at the end of the term as something that is to be done to report to get a higher level picture. Formative assessments need to be more specific and done while teaching is happening so that it informs your teaching. Okay, now I'm going to come ask you about uh, an aspect of formative assessments which comes up a lot. So when we speak to school teachers and even school leaders sometimes, um, and we ask them about their routines for formative assessments, and if there's some data that they're collecting through this formative assessment process, we always get not always, but most of the time, we are given data on their unit tests or their term exams or what they call internal exams. I mean, for me, that's a skew, right? I mean, there's something that has gone wrong somewhere. So I just wanted to check whether, we have been able to figure out why this is happening. And before that, also addressing that why do we think unit tests are not formative assessments?
Right. So I think it goes back to the features of formative and summative assessments that you just summarized before this. One is the timing. Um, what schools hear and what teachers hear is that formative assessments are supposed to be continuous and summative assessments are supposed to be at the end of the year or the end of a period. And if we focus only on the timing aspect of assessments, then this assumption that formative assessments are basically unit tests, it starts making sense. We understand why schools are confused because unit tests do happen more regularly, class tests do happen more regularly. And so if that's the main feature of formative assessments, that they have to be continuous, that's sort of being met by by doing class tests or unit tests. So it's understandable where that misconception comes from. Um, but I think along with timing, the other feature of formative and summative assessments, which gets missed out, is that formative assessments are supposed to give teachers feedback on where their students are, and of course, give students that kind of feedback as well in order to improve. But formative assessments are not a, a final end result for students. They are, like you said, they are rehearsals for a play that is coming up at the end of the year. They are practice to ensure that we are on the right track. Um, and if that purpose of formative assessments is not clear to to teachers and to school managements, it's understandable that they are confusing unit tests as formative assessments. Um, and to answer your other question, and maybe I mean I'd like to hear your thoughts also on this. Why do we say unit tests are not formative assessments? For that reason, that unit tests are not frequent enough, unfortunately, even though they're a lot more in number than a final exam. They're not frequent enough because we wait really long. We wait a month and a half to give students those exams or those tests, and students are not then given any feedback on how to improve, or data from those unit tests is not used to inform our teaching. It just becomes another mark or a grade in the report card, in the student's report card.
Right. I mean, exactly. I mean, I think that's where the confusion is, right? I mean, I think you really summarize it pretty decent, very well. That um, the unit test has become some sort of a mismatch between a formative and a summative assessment, because we are using the marks that you get later for reports. Maybe it even reflects in the final marks as a small percentage, and so on. Whereas on the other hand, it's not really informing or changing the way you're teaching in class, because the unit test actually, like you said, it's not that frequent. So what would generally happen is, if I've finished a topic at the beginning of the month, the unit test is not happening till the end of the month. So there's no way that I'm going to go, based on information that I'm getting from the unit test, I'm no way going to go back and teach that topic again and address some misconception that students may have. It's very unlikely, at least, that that is going to happen. So I think, I agree with you, that is the feedback part, where the feedback to the teacher and to the students is not happening with unit tests. No, not happening immediately with the unit test, so that the teaching can be different, the learning can be different. And I think that is where and that's why I don't know how many times we've had to tell schools that, okay, no, that's not what we mean. We mean actual in-class assessments. So actually, that's a nice segue to talk about actual in-class assessments. So, okay, we say that unit tests, term exams, blah, 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 they're not formative assessments. So what is formative assessments? When do we do formative assessments?
Hi, we have developed an amazing tool to help teachers plan their lessons. TEPS, or Things Education's Pedagogical Strategies. TEPS helps teachers by reducing the time that they spend on planning lessons. TEPS also helps you if you want to try a different pedagogical approach to teaching. So, if you want to know how to teach a topic in a project-based or inquiry-based or even constructivist learning approach, TEPS is for you. TAPS helps even seasoned teachers with fresh ideas on how to teach specific topics. So, scan the QR code on the screen or visit taps.school and join a community of empowered educators. Great teaching begins with TAPS.
So what is formative assessments? When do we do formative assessments? Do I need to have a special lesson or class just to do assessments? So I just want to start with that.
Right. So maybe I'll share an example from our early learning curriculum, um, to explain what we mean by formative assessments, and then we can talk about you know the questions that you asked and how frequently they need to be done, whether we need to have special lesson plans for that. Um, so just off the top of my head, one of the things that we do in our early learning curriculum, and it's a very simple activity where students in lower KG mostly, or in nursery even, have to look at blocks or toys that are in their classroom and match flashcards of the same color to them. So if they have a red block, they have to pick up a red flashcard, match it to it. Then they have to go and pick up a flashcard that says red, the word red in LKG, and go and match it to the same thing. So they're matching a real object to its color, to its name. And that's an activity we do in the classroom. But at the end of every week, we ask teachers to do these activities again. But as teachers, their role then is to observe students and see if they're able to match them correctly. Um, Teachers then observe if they're able to match the object to the real color. So if they're matching a red block to an orange flashcard, that gives me immediate feedback that, oh, there's some confusion here about the subtle differences between these two colors. Or if they're matching a red flashcard to the word green, then we know that if they've matched the red block and the red color together, they can see the colors and the similarities. but the word of the color is where, the name of the color is where they're struggling. Um, so for the students, they're still doing what they're doing every day in class. They're still playing with these blocks, they're still matching, they're still reading, they're doing everything that they're supposed to do every day. What changes is the lens through which the teacher is now seeing them. The teacher is now sitting with a very clear focus on the learning outcome, uh, checking where the student is struggling and where they might need intervention. Um, so based on this example, do we need special lessons for formative assessments? No. Formative assessments can happen every day. They should happen every day. In our case, in the case of our early learning curriculum, we specifically asked teachers that if not throughout the week, at least on the last day of the week, um, look at this through the lens of a formative assessment and not just teaching. But the older the students are, the easier it is to do this every single day. As students are doing something, they're doing a worksheet, they're having a discussion. If you walk around, keep your learning outcome in mind and listen to what's happening or see their worksheets, you're getting immediate feedback about their learning level.
Right. I think we will come back to that worksheet, etc. I want to discuss that a little bit more in detail. But I think what you mentioned about the early learning curriculum, I think also kind of aligns with what the NEP is saying, right? NEP and NCF for early stages is actually asking us as educators to maintain a progress report, more than report, a progress chart where you can actually track where the students, how the students are moving in 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 their learning. So yeah, doing it weekly or even during the week, anytime should really help with that. That's so you're saying that okay, it could be a different day, sorry, a specific day of the week where we are doing assessments so that we get some feedback, observational assessments in this case. We get feedback and that would inform our teaching for the next week, um, going forward. Okay, so that is one way of doing it. And then I know you mentioned a lot of different things after that for older students. So let's just go into that a little bit in detail. You spoke about worksheets, you spoke about listening in on students. I know that sounds wrong, but no, while they are talking about the work that they are supposed to be doing and other things. So can we also just go into each of these a little bit? So worksheets, I think everyone knows what worksheets are, but if you can just tell us how they will help you in your formative assessments. Because again, worksheets are given as practice, worksheets are given as, okay, you will 10% of the marks are you can counted in the term exam or whatever, right? So the role of worksheets specifically as formative assessment tools.
Right. So, like I said again, it's a matter of changing the lens through which you're looking at these worksheets. We're still asking students to do worksheets. What might change is what might operationally or practically change is maybe asking them to spend 10 or 15 minutes in the classroom doing a worksheet as opposed to giving it as homework or doing it as the last 10 minutes of the class. Instead, start your class with asking them to do a worksheet for something that you taught them yesterday. And as they're doing their worksheet, walk around and see where they're making mistakes, not with the aim to mark them or grade them or reprimand, but with the aim to understand where students are struggling. If there's a pattern to which you can see across your classroom. So if you've taught something like how to punctuate direct speech sentences correctly in grade 5 or grade 6 as an English teacher. A very common mistake you'll see is placing the full stop or the question mark or the exclamation mark outside the closing quotation marks. It's a very common mistake that even adults make. Um, and so that is something that you can walk around and see and then specifically uh, spend the next 15 minutes of the class giving them practice on and getting them to read storybooks or just read excerpts from their textbooks to see how these have actually been punctuated. Making a silly game out of it and making some sort of competition out of it to see who gets the most right. But the aim of it is not to grade students, it's to help them along and use that feedback as a teacher to make sure that your students are reaching their learning outcome. So it's a change in the lens through which you're looking at the worksheets. The worksheets themselves can remain the same.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, and because again, from our experience, it's not that teachers haven't been doing these things. I think these things have been happening in classrooms all over India for years now. It's just the perspective that needs to change as to why am I doing this? It's not because it needs to be ticked off on the register that I've done this, but if it's giving me more information about student learning, why not? Um, okay, so those are nice examples that can be used. I have the information now. Like the example that you used was like it was almost immediate that you walked around in the classroom, you saw how the punctuation was wrongly done by about say 20% of the students. Versus in a different case, it's wrong for about one or two students only. And say it is wrong for about 80% of the students. So then my approach as a teacher would change, right? As to what I would do. If it were just one or two students, I wouldn't even bother doing this again in the classroom. I would just specifically talk to those students. And similarly, if it was 80% of the students getting it wrong, that means probably me as a teacher went wrong somewhere, something was miscommunicated, or maybe the textbook has written it wrong, or whatever. Oh, sorry, whatever reference book, not the textbook itself, but whatever reference book they have. So that gives me feedback as teacher that okay, wait, something has majorly gone wrong here. Or they're it's either me, it's the reference book, or it's probably something that they picked up low, one of the lower grades. And it's become a habit for them, and now we need to break that habit for them, etc. So that is the whole point, right? That you can collect data very quickly and make inferences and then start trying to solve for one of those things. um, and I think that's the crux of the matter, where when we say formative assessments, it's done frequently enough so that we get this feedback and we use that feedback to inform our teaching going ahead. I think there's not much more to ask, Ritu, but I'm going to ask you one final question. If I'm a teacher who wants to you know change my lens, I want to do this, I want to get this information uh, about my students, but I'm still going to struggle because I have not done it ever in my life. So what would you say the first step they should take towards doing formative assessments? Explain the question a little bit more so they can think about the answer in the meantime. Because I think as educators, as teachers, we are doing quote unquote formative assessments a lot when we are, like, for example, a lot, but badly. Um, because we do ask this question, right, to students in class and expect a chorus answer. Have you understood? Or what is that? Can I move ahead? Can we move ahead? Or something like that. Those are, I remember these things my teachers used to ask me when I was a student. So yeah, so if any teacher says, oh, I'm doing formative assessments, I will believe them. It's just that it's happening not very well and not very, in a very structured way. So what would be the first step is what I'm asking. My question is longer than the answer, I think.
I think the first step, and this is something we've said over and over again, the first step is starting with learning outcomes. If your focus is too broad, if you're thinking of, I'm going to use the same example again, if you're thinking of rules of direct speech and indirect speech as a topic that you need to cover uh, in one class, that's too much. It's too broad. There are too many different nuances to the rules. There are too many different exceptions to the rules. Uh, it depends on whether you're asking a question, you're using a negative sentence, you're using a declarative sentence. So your learning outcome has to be very, very specific. Your learning outcomes have to be very, very specific if you're doing multiple of them in the classroom. And that's the first step to ensuring that your formative assessments are then focused. You're really looking for very specific areas of confusion. I think that would be the very, very first step. Uh, And maybe after that, coming up with quick ways to do these assessments without students thinking of them as assessments. Students should see them as a regular part of class, as regular questions you're asking. But if your lens is that of getting feedback and ensuring that you can see where students are struggling, that would be the second step.
Okay, thanks. I think that's very useful. So, as I understand, and hopefully I'm summarizing correctly, do formative assessments inside the classroom, basically it should be part of your lesson plan. Don't wait for the unit tests, because unit tests are not formative assessments at all. To do that, first have a focused learning outcome. For example, like the example that Ritu gave about where to put the exclamation point. Now, your learning outcome could be students know exactly where to put the exclamation point. And if that is a learning outcome and it's that specific, asking the question also it becomes almost trivial after that, right? You can just flip that sentence can be turned into a question by saying that, okay, just write this sentence out and put an exclamation mark wherever it's needed. That's it. I mean, that becomes your question. So I get what you're saying in terms of, having that specific learning outcome, which will ease the question making part of it, or how you need to assess it part of it. Um, that's good to know. And apart from just, I mean, asking a student question and roaming around in the classroom, there are other things that you can do. You can ask students a question and ask them to respond on one small, say, slip of paper, which which you can just collect at the end of the class. Or what a lot of teachers do now in private schools, where they have to set up all the technology before the class begins, is right at the beginning of the class, ask a question, hand out the slips, so that you know whether students remember or recall things that have happened in the previous class. And by the time you set up the technology, your PowerPoint presentation is on, up and running, etc., etc., the students have already responded to it. Collect those slips and then start your class. So, and why am I saying slips? Because again, you get concrete evidence. You can actually, right after class, just go through those slips and see whether students have gotten it or not. So yeah, I think that was just my 2 cents on the whole formative assessments bit. But yeah, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Ritu, for this wonderful conversation. And we apologize to our viewers and listeners. Today has been a slightly more makeshift episode, because we are traveling, both of us are traveling, and it is that time of the year, isn't it, when we have to travel a lot. There are lots of professional development sessions happening. So please excuse us for that, but we'll be back again. We will be back again in 15 days, and we wanted to make sure that we don't miss any episode. We may do some makeshift content, but yeah, we will always be here every 15 days. I would also actually like to thank Prateek and Shrishti, who do a lot of work back end to make us look much better than what we are. We're not as articulate as this video seems to show. Okay, so thanks a lot to Prateek and Shrishti also. But yeah, thank you. And if you like this video, please like. Even if you don't like it, subscribe. It helps us keep this channel free, and tell everybody about it. Tell everyone that you meet at school in this new academic year that, hey, these people do this. Yes, yes, we do it. So please tell everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you, Ritu.